It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna, everybody. Welcome into episode 421 of Rico Brogna. We got a lot to talk about. Is Jose Iglesias about to be a former Met? Is Nick Madrigal the reason why? The latest on Pete Alonso and all sorts of Mets nonsense. But we do our Rico Brogna's live on YouTube. And then a lot of you can download the podcast, maybe a day after, maybe a few hours after. So I am going to warn you, if you are downloading this podcast on a Sunday morning or a Sunday afternoon or a Sunday night, or maybe it's Monday now, you may want to fast forward the first 5 minutes of this, Rico, because we are reacting to news that literally came out 30 seconds ago, or maybe 5 minutes ago. And it is stunning to me. So by the time you're listening to this a day from now or 6 hours from now, you have already kind of gotten used to it. But we live in a world in which, in this moment, the Dallas Mavericks stunningly traded Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers for Anthony Davis. Now, there are other pieces involved, like a 2029 first-round pick and Max Christie and Markieff Morris. But the bottom line is this. Because I know a lot of reactions to this is goddamn Lakers. That was Hoff's reaction. Goddamn Lakers. They got Luka. They get everybody. That wasn't my reaction to this. I had two other reactions. Reaction number one. Boy, Kyrie Irving will kill anything he's involved in. That's reaction number one. Like, Kyrie Irving goes to the Mavericks. They get to the NBA Finals, God bless them, and lose to the Celtics. But hell of a run by the Kyrie, a part of Dallas team. And then less than a year later, they take their franchise player, who I understand has been dealing with a calf issue for what feels like over a month now, hasn't played in a month. You take your franchise player who's 25 years old and you trade him for Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a future first-round pick. Is Mark Cuban high? And what did Kyrie Irving do that caused Mark Cuban to think that's a good idea? So reaction number one is not even to be annoyed with the LA Lakers or LeBron James gets whatever he wants. It's more, what the hell is going on there? And here's my second reaction. And I'm sorry. When you collect 5 million first-round picks like the basketball team I root for, you don't want to do it and cash it in for De'Aaron Fox. You don't want to cash it in for Giannis, who's 30 and is only going to get broken down more as he gets older. Guy's never developed a three-point shot, has gotten worse from the free throw line. Giannis at 33 will not be someone you want to build around. So no thank you on both those guys. You take all your picks and you go get Luka if he's available. I call up Mark Cuban. I say, here's Cam Johnson. Here's Nick Claxton if you want him. I mean, you're excited over Anthony Davis. And here's every goddamn first-round pick we own. Now take it and give me Luka. And I build around that. So I get it. The Lakers. This is like Pau Gasol all over again, or whatever stupid, or Shaq signing him as a free agent. Whatever move you want to bring up. Or Beningo would even say, Will Chamberlain or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Whatever example you want to give. That's like the third thing on my mind. The first thing on my mind is Kyrie Irving breaks everything. The second thing on my mind is Mark Cuban's an idiot. And the third thing on my mind is, how come my team couldn't get him? That's my reaction. My team couldn't get this freaking guy. And of course, one of the main reasons why Jalen Brunson's in New York is because we got Luka. We don't need to pay Jalen Brunson, nor do we think he's that good. So this is a stunning NBA development. I don't think anybody in their right freaking mind saw this one coming, that the Dallas Mavericks would trade Luka anywhere, let alone the Lakers. Now, where does this change the Western Conference? Look, this is not like baseball where you add a player at the trade deadline and it's just insert a guy in a lineup and everything works out well. Chemistry matters. And Luka's been out for over a month with a calf issue. When's he coming back? Is he healthy? Now, LeBron's incredible. We saw his performance at the Garden on Saturday night. So, and he's also 40. I mean, is LeBron going to be able to stay healthy? So I'll go out on a limb right now and say this is not guaranteeing the Lakers a championship, nor are they going to win an NBA championship, but my God, it's stunning. So there you go. There's my instant reaction to Luka. We'll spend more time on this, I'm sure, Evan and Tiki on WFAN. on this Luka to the Laker deal. Now, the reason you're here to talk about backup middle infielders. Hoff, that's a transition as we record this live at 12:30 in the morning. Let's talk about one of the biggest mega trades in the NBA, but let's get to what people really care about. Nick Madrigal.
Dude, but that's what the Rico wants to hear, man. They don't want to hear about Luka. They don't want to hear about Anthony Davis. They don't want to hear about your ex-lover, Kyrie Irving. They want to hear about Nick. What does that mean for the Mets?
No, and it's funny. This is the second time we've had NBA be a part of the Rico. Remember the shocking trade of Mikal Bridges during the Subway Series. Who could forget that? And I'll give you a heads up. There will be another moment in which the Rico and the NBA will intersect. And I'm going to warn you about this. My basketball team, who no one roots for, no one cares about, that's fine. They're going to be in the lottery. The night of the lottery, I get very drunk. So we're going to have we're going to have the most drunken Rico of all time because, and I haven't been in the lottery in a long time. Think about it. My team has either made the playoffs or traded their picks away for half a century. But the last time they were in the lottery with high hopes was the John Wall lottery. And it was the same night they lost the game to the Braves. I actually wrote about it in my book, My Mets Bible. And I got so nervous that I got wasted. So now having the Rico Brogna and knowing that we've had the 420 Rico, we've had the drunk Rico, I do want to warn you, the night of the NBA lottery, it's a Monday night. I think it's a Monday night. And they play the Pirates. So get ready, Hoff. That is the early drunken Rico edition where either you're going to get the most ecstatic Evan ever, talking about Cooper Flagg for 25 minutes, intermingling a Met Pirate game, or I'm going to be depressed. And it's going to be like,
So I have to ask you a question because, usually when we're doing, our drunk Rico, it's a fun setting. You're on vacation. You're relaxed. There's nothing really going on. Even though there's baseball games, there's nothing negative going on. You're having a good time. Are you going to change to the hard stuff? Are you going to have, a bottle of tequila next year?
Yeah, it's going to be Maker's Mark, usually. And it's going to just be sitting next to me. And the entire night, the build up to the lottery, I get very nervous. So I don't know if it's going to be a celebratory Rico based on what happens, but I'll do a Rico that night because there is a Met Pirate game. So it's the first game of the series, but we'll do one either way. It'll be something. And I know I have my comeuppance coming to me because there are a few people that may remember many years ago. I did I guess it wasn't a live podcast because it wasn't on YouTube, but I did a podcast of the old Evan Roberts podcast in which I reacted to the Knicks lottery. That was the Zion Williamson lottery. And I celebrated when the Knicks finished third. And so there are a lot of Knicks fans who tell me that that is the day they started to hate me and hate the Nets because of me celebrating the Knicks losing the lottery. So I'm sure, because most people are not Net fans, they will probably, if they do tune into that Rico, they will do it to drink my tears. And that is understandable, and that's okay. All right, let's get to the baseball. So Nick Madrigal signed with the New York Mets, formerly of the Chicago Cubs, former prospect of the White Sox. And the origin of this was kind of funny. It happened while I was doing the show with Tiki, and we break glass, like the Stone Cold Steve Austin glass break every time there's breaking news. And so I tell Sean and Loogie, break it over real news. You don't want to do it over minor things. So the Mets signed Nick Madrigal. They break the glass. Sean says the Mets have made a signing. And my reaction is, it's a Pete. And he announces it's Nick Madrigal. And I got annoyed with him. And I said, come on. This isn't the Rico Brogna. This is Evan and Tiki. It's a little different. We're not breaking down every intricacy of the Mets. Did you really need to break the glass? And Sean got very defensive in this because he really thinks that we needed to break the glass for Nick Madrigal. And what he held on to was, this is the end of Jose Iglesias. And you can't argue, Evan, that that's a big deal. So let's examine this. The first thing I said to Sean at the time, and I'll say it right now, is what kind of contract is it? That's a big deal. If he's guaranteed a major league job, then sure. I mean, they're not going to have enough room for Iglesias to be on the roster. But the reality is he was DFA'd by Chicago. It's a split contract, and he still has options. So let's answer the headline right out of the gate. This move does not completely eliminate Jose Iglesias. Is it likely the Mets are going to re-sign Jose Iglesias at this point? The answer is no, and I'll give you a few reasons why. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it because I don't think we've spent enough time talking about Iglesias, the good or the bad, the merits of signing him, the merits of letting him go. And there's a lot of aspects to it we're not sure of. Like, is he asking for multiple years? Is he asking for big money? Is he asking for an everyday job? Like, the Mets can't guarantee Jose Iglesias an everyday job. But a lot has kind of happened this offseason. Remember when the offseason first began, one of the assumptions I had, which I've been wrong about so far, is that Jeff McNeil is a legitimate trade candidate, and there's actually a decent chance he's going to be traded. And if that happened, we would be talking about second base a little bit differently, that it could have been an Iglesias Acuna platoon or an Iglesias Mauricio platoon, which I doubt coming off the injury, but it could have been Iglesias as the placeholder, much like Reyes Sanchez was 20 years ago, I think, for Jose Reyes, or Alex Cora was for Jose Reyes. So he's here, he's playing, and if he plays well, great. If he doesn't, he's holding the job temporarily for a young player. Not trading Jeff McNeil and having the outfield as kind of loaded as it is with options, to me, means that Jeff McNeil's the everyday second baseman. Now, if Jeff McNeil doesn't hit, if Jeff McNeil gets off to the first half start he had last year, could that change? Of course. But that has also changed a little bit the view of second base. Now, as far as Iglesias, the player, is concerned, we have tried over the last few weeks to say, hey, let's eliminate the emotion of Pete Alonso. Let's not talk about homegrown. Let's not talk about all-time Mets home run leader. Let's just talk about the player. And I've said over and over again, strip all that stuff away. The Mets need Pete Alonso back. The Mets are a better team with Pete Alonso. Well, let's do that with Jose Iglesias. I know it's not easy, but let's do that. Let's strip away OMG. Let's strip away Candelita. Let's strip away the good vibes of last year. And I know that's tough to do, but this is its own season, right? Like, we can't assume that the OMG craze and the vibes and the aura of 2024 are going to repeat, can we? And by the way, is that enough of a reason to say, who cares what the player is, bring him back? Like, I'm trying to be fair about this because I, like most people listening or watching the Rico, and I said it before the offseason began, bring the guy back. Vibes, vibes, vibes. OMG. How can the Mets not bring Jose Iglesias back? Well, David Stearns has taught us a few things, even if we're not paying attention, right? I mean, we're paying attention, but maybe we're not paying attention to the right things. If he is the cold-hearted but smart team president he is, where he's not going to let emotion get in the way, it is business, then what's the business of Jose Iglesias? He's not going to think of OMG. He's not going to think of the locker room because that kind of stuff is probably a once every blue moon kind of thing, and it probably doesn't translate in 2025 the way it did in 2024. So let's put that aside for a second. We'll get back to it because I know there are probably a lot of people saying, no, it does matter. The locker room matters. Bring him back. Everything turned when he was there. Nick Castellanos said he's the MVP of the National League. We'll get back to it. Let's talk about the player. Jose Iglesias hit .337 last year. He's a career .283 hitter. He was not in the major leagues in 2023. When he was in the major leagues in 2022, I mean, he hit .290. Like, he was a productive player. When he was in the major leagues in 2021, he was a productive player. He had .270. But is he hitting .337 again? The answer is probably not. It's probably not, if we're being fair. It's probably closer to his career average. He's also going to be 35 years old. In fact, he is 35 years old. He turned 35 the first week of January. So is he hitting .337 again? Probably not. Does Jose Iglesias hit for power? The answer is no. It's just one attribute of him. I'm not penalizing him. I'm just saying. Does Jose Iglesias walk a lot? The answer is no. In fact, he never walks. The major league average in terms of walk percentage is a little over 8%. Jose Iglesias last year walked 4%, which is right around his career average of 4.3%. So he does not hit for power. He does not walk. He does hit for a pretty good average, but he doesn't get on base a lot. Like, that's his way of getting on base. If he doesn't walk, he's not getting on base. I'm sorry, if he doesn't hit, he's not getting on base. Now, he does have elite contact skills. He hits the freaking ball. How many times last year did Jose Iglesias come through, even if it wasn't with a hit, but by good contact? And how many times did he come through with a 2-out hit? How many times did he come through with 2 strikes on him? All of it's true. But you have to wonder if he can do it again. And I think if we strip away Candelita for a second and we strip away the vibes, the answer is, oh, there's no way he does that again. There's no way. Now, he can still be a productive player. His 275 career average is what it is. He still has elite contact skills, is what it is. He still has the ability to beat out that infield hit, which he did so many times last year, even at 35 years old, even if his sprint speed takes a little bit of a hit. But again, stripping away the emotion, there's no chance in hell he's hitting 375. He hit 382 when the ball was put in play last year. That's not normal. That's not near his career average. That's something that's very difficult to replicate. Now, this is not me telling you Jose Iglesias should not come back. I'm just trying to strip away the emotion when we talk about him as a player. He's not repeating what he did last year. Now you look at, well, what will his role be on this team? Well, like I said, Jeff McNeil's going to be the everyday second baseman. The New York Mets also have a handful of options to potentially take that job away from Jeff in Luis Angel Acuna, in Ronnie Mauricio, in Jet Williams. They are all legitimate candidates at some point to be the everyday second baseman for the New York Mets. That can absolutely happen. Jose Iglesias is a utility player. I think that's his role. He wouldn't be an everyday player. So put Pete aside for a second. Right now, when you look at the Met roster, and we'll do Rico's in which we really break this down in terms of predicting the 26-man roster, talking about what position battles there'll be, but let's just look at the infield for a second. The catching spots are set up. Torrens and Alvarez, nothing's changing that. Torrens doesn't even have any options left. He's up here. Alvarez is up here. Barring injury, those are your catchers. The New York Mets right now, barring a trade, have 6 outfielders. All out of options, all locks, barring injury, to be on this team. Juan Soto, obviously. Starling Marte, barring a trade, obviously they can, clear a spot by trading him. Brandon Nimmo, hopefully he's not on the IL to start the year. Tyrone Taylor, Jose Siri, Jesse Winker. That's 6. And that doesn't even include Jose Azocar, who doesn't have any options and is on the 40-man roster. I assume he's on the outside looking in. So they have 6 outfielders. That's why when you hear, they offered Mark Canha a non-guaranteed contract, yeah, it's non-guaranteed because look at that outfield. That outfield's set unless they make a trade. And they could still make a trade. It's still early February. I get that. But 6 outfielders. And then you've got 3 infielders that are also locks in McNeil, Lindor, and Vientos. The rest of them either have options or they just may not be on the team. So when you do the math on that, there's 11 locks for the roster. You can only have 13. Or, you could have more technically, but that means carrying less pitchers. There's no way in this day and age the Mets are carrying less than 13 pitchers, which means there are 13 position players, which only gives you 2 open roster spots. If Pete Alonso is taking one of them, and God willing he is, that means 1 spot left. And here are your options. Brett Beatty, who still has options. Luis Angel Acuna, who still has options. Ronnie Mauricio. Jared Young, who's an interesting guy. They picked him up off of, he played in the KBO last year, played in AAA, left-hand hitter, can play corner, infield positions, plus the outfield. And now Nick Madrigal. If you sign Iglesias to a major league deal, the competition's over. None of those guys can make the team. Also assuming you re-sign Pete Alonso. All of those guys I mentioned have the ability to be sent down. Iglesias would not, because there's no way Jose Iglesias is accepting a minor league deal. You'd have to think, coming off the year we described, even if you don't think he's going to repeat it, he's earned a major league contract. So the numbers game tells you they don't have a lot of room for him. Now, Pete doesn't come back. I think that changes things. And I know that's a weird juxtaposition, but then if they are going with Beatty at first base or at third base with Vientos at first base, it could open up the possibility that Iglesias is a part of that platoon because he could play third base. Now, if the Mets go out and trade for a Yandy Diaz or a Ryan Mountcastle or any of the other backup options that have been mentioned, well, then that throws the Iglesias thing away again and says, well, is there room for him? So there is room for him in terms of guaranteed spots because all of those guys I mentioned, including Madrigal, can be sent down. But when you start to break the roster down a little bit, are they going to sign him? Because that eliminates any competition. So do I want to sign him? Here's what I'm wrestling back and forth about. As a player, as a guy who put up the production he put up last year, I don't think he can do that again. I also recognize he's 35. And a lot of the guys we just mentioned, while unproven, are much younger and could very well blossom into better players than Jose Iglesias. But the vibes were awesome. It's very difficult to just eliminate that. The leadership he provided that locker room, the experience, just everything he brought to the team. So I'm not throwing him out with the bathwater. I'm just trying to examine the situation in a fair way. And when you include all that other stuff, the locker room stuff, the fun stuff that we had from 2024, I prefer to have him back. I would. But now you have to ask, what's he asking for? If he is asking for an everyday job, you cannot give that to him. There are ways he can play, and you can explain it, but you can't guarantee him an everyday job. If he's asking for a multi-year contract, I love vibes, and I know Steve's got all this money. It would not be smart to give Jose Iglesias a multi-year deal. Again, if you strip that stuff away and we just try to be fair about him, giving Jose Iglesias a 2-year, $12 million deal is not smart baseball. He is a utility infielder. And the Mets actually have some very intriguing utility options. But let me give you one more positive about Iglesias that I cannot say about Jared Young, that I cannot say about Brett Beatty, and I cannot say about Nick Madrigal. Jose Iglesias can be a backup shortstop. And I do think that matters because go back to that infield competition I just said. McNeil, Lindor, Vientos. If Alonso's back, you have one spot for your bench. How is that one person not a guy who can play shortstop? See, to me, that makes Nick Madrigal, and we'll get more into him in a second, not the guy. He doesn't play shortstop. He's never played shortstop. Are you really going to go into opening day and even continue through the early part of a season in which you do not have a guy on your roster who can play shortstop? You would think that gives Luis Angel Acuna an edge to win the job. And maybe it does. But if you also believe Luis Angel Acuna needs more seasoning, let's not freak out over 2 weeks he had at the major league level. And maybe the Mets don't want him to be a super utility guy because they want him to play every day, which is a common thing with prospects. You don't want a prospect coming up here and maybe playing once or twice a week. That role I just described may not be every day. It's certainly not every day. It's a super utility role as the guy who can play shortstop as a backup. Well, if you don't want him doing that every day, or you want him playing every day, I should say, then he's not the great guy to be the backup. That's where Iglesias comes in. Iglesias comes in because he can play third base. He can play second base. He can be that super utility player, but also play shortstop. Jared Young doesn't play shortstop. Nick Madrigal doesn't play shortstop. Brett Beatty does not play shortstop. The only guys who I mentioned in this kind of infield battle who can be a backup shortstop for Francisco Lindor is Ronnie Mauricio, who's coming off a torn ACL, and Luis Angel Acuna. So it's tough. It's complicated. I'd like Iglesias back. And this comes back to the same thing we've talked about with Pete Alonso. It's a negotiation. Can't negotiate against yourself. It would not be smart to get Pete Alonso $35 million a year when no one's bidding more than 22 or whatever it is. Same thing with Iglesias. Now, all the reporting has said the Mets have really not made any kind of serious interest in Jose Iglesias, which makes you wonder two things, that it may not be what he's asking for. And keep this in mind, Jose Iglesias is represented by Scott Boras. Not the news you want to hear, but it's true. He's represented by Scott Boras. If they haven't shown a big interest in bringing him back, or they haven't prioritized it, then is it what Iglesias is asking for, or is it simply what I've laid out that they just figure we have internal options? Why throw a few extra $1 million out there, especially if we're going to be close to the tax, on something that we can kind of have from within? But I do think it's very important that they have a guy on the roster who can play shortstop. I think it's going to be important as Lindor gets older. As much as we love that Lindor plays every game, it's great, it's fantastic, it's amazing. He's getting older. He's on a long-term contract. There needs to be days, I'm not saying it's often, but there needs to be days where Francisco Lindor DHs, or dare I say, doesn't play. And I think coming off of the year he had, a great year, an MVP caliber season, coming off of that kind of season, coming off a season in which he's getting a little bit older, I think this would be a good year for Francisco Lindor to maybe not play 162 games. Last year, he played 152 games. But remember, the games he missed, really the only games he missed, was related to the bad back he had at the end of the year. The last 3 years, here are the games played by Lindor. 161, 160, 152. Lindor is 31 years old. He is signed to a contract that takes him through 2031. I'm not telling you it's got to be every week or even once every other week, but I do think it would be smart. But even late in games, Mets are losing 14-2. Mets are up 14-2. Wouldn't it be smart to get Lindor off of his feet? So I think it is very important for this roster to have someone who can play shortstop. And I just went through the names. Acuna and Mauricio would be the only guys besides Iglesias that could provide that as a backup shortstop.
I don't mind your outlook as, hey, you know what? Francisco Lindor can't play 162 every single year again. It can't happen. Last year was the back injury, sure. But do you really think that, like, he should have an off day? Or you think the reason, like, for example, Jesse Winker and Starling Marte right now are really the DHs at the moment, which is kind of a good thing because you can put Lindor to that DH role. Would you really have him sit and miss 10 games, or would you just move him to the DH role?
I mean, you'd want to be smart and use the DH. I mean, the DH is a weapon now where you can get guys off their feet and give them rest and keep their bat in the lineup. Do you want Iglesias back? Knowing everything, knowing the roster crunch, knowing he's 35, knowing he may be asking for a lot of money, how important is it to bring back Jose Iglesias?
How important is team chemistry? That's what I ask you. I got to be honest with you. How important is a vibe? How important it is to have people that uplift? What's the value on that?
There is no sabermetric stat for that.
I know. Yeah. Listen, I'm not saying that you have to have Jose Iglesias. I don't think he's necessary. If I'm building a team, he's not the first guy I got to look to put on the team. But the fact that he is flexible, he's got the ability to play any infield position. Yeah, I wouldn't mind to have him, but I never once thought or have thought about him being like, oh, bring him in, maybe trade Jeff McNeil. Maybe he could be the everyday second baseman. Well, no, it's more about spelling people. That's all it is.
Honestly, and the deal wasn't out there, and I think that's where ultimately I was wrong about the McNeil thing. Yeah, it would have been nice. It would have made sense if McNeil could have netted them back a solid reliever. If Jeff McNeil for Ryan Presley, and Presley wanted to come here, was a real trade before he got traded to Chicago, it would have made sense. And then I think I would have pushed harder for, well, you got to bring Iglesias back. And then I would have viewed second base as Iglesias as a placeholder for one of the younger players, to eventually take that job. Maybe right away. Maybe Luis Acuna has a monster spring training and he's got the job right away. The other appeal of Iglesias would be if there's an injury. We sit here right now, everybody's healthy. Everybody's out there. Mark Vientos misses a few weeks. I mean, do we want to sit there and watch Jared Young get called up from AAA and be the everyday third baseman, as opposed to, hey, we know Iglesias is a pro. He's not getting a lot of home runs. He's not going to walk a lot, but he's going to give you a great glove over there, and he'll give you quality at-bats.
No, I honestly, yeah, I would say the Iglesias side of things, but that's why you have Madrigal now. I mean, that's why you brought Nick Madrigal in.
So,
and to be fair, real quickly, I mean, last year, the one thing that we gave credit to David Stearns on was that he made a lot of mistakes, and he got rid of those mistakes. He had Wendell, he had Zach Short, and then we turned into Jose Iglesias, who's third on the list to get the call. So, right. I mean, you really kind of, at this point in time, if Iglesias wants a lot of money, you can't do that for somebody that it's kind of like a third down the list if the others don't work out.
100%. That's where I get it. Like, if Iglesias is asking for a 3-year deal, can't just give it to him. You can't. I mean, you have to treat it harder than even the Pete Alonso thing. Because I think with Pete Alonso, while you don't want to negotiate against yourself, I think a lot of us agree. I can't even say everybody. Hey, they're better off with Pete Alonso. It's important because you can't replace Pete Alonso. Jose Iglesias, from a utility infield standpoint, can be replaced. It's not like, oh my God, they don't have Jose Iglesias. And look, you bring up the OMG in the locker room and the vibes. There's no way to define that. There's no way. I think team chemistry is slightly overrated. I think when you win, the chemistry is great. Like, look, the Mets turned it around when they called Iglesias up. No doubt about it. But the OMG song doesn't work if the Mets aren't winning. In fact, the Mets started playing the OMG song when they were hitting home runs. I didn't even notice it for the first bunch of games. I don't think anyone did it. It took a while for it to become a thing because the Mets started winning. And when they were winning, things become fun. So chemistry and its importance to me is very similar to chicken and the egg theory. When you're not playing well, like 2023, you look for what's wrong with the locker room. Everybody hates each other. And in 2024, when things are great, it's why is it so amazing? Oh, there's a catchy song. So I don't know how to define it. That's why when we have these discussions, I'm trying to look at the baseball aspect of it. I'm trying to look at, okay, because he was great last year. I don't think that should be minimized, but can he be replaced? What's the importance of him? Where would I look? Overall, if the money is fine, I want the guy back for the reasons I laid out. He can play every position. He does it beautifully. He's a wonderful glove. He makes contact, which is great. He'll give you those war of at-bats. If, God forbid, there is an injury to Vientos or McNeil or even Lindor, like Iglesias can play, and he can play well, and he can fill in. So from a baseball standpoint, I'd like the player, but he is coming off a 337 season and his agent, Scott Boras, which leads you to believe he's probably asking for something crazy. As far as Madrigal is concerned, I'm not going to tell you he's Zach Short or he's Joey Wendell or he's going to turn into one of those additions. What's intriguing about him is that he was a top prospect. There was a time in which Nick Madrigal was projected to be a star. Now, what is he now as a 28-year-old, relatively short, but not quite Jose Altuve, second baseman, third baseman? Look, the track record from playing in the major leagues is actually like oddly similar to Jose Iglesias. His career batting average is not bad, but he also like doesn't get on base that much. And he also doesn't strike out a lot, and he doesn't hit for a lot of power, so he kind of fits that similar aspect. Like his walk percentage, we talked about Iglesias being at around 4%, which is well below the league average. If you look at Madrigal's major league experience, which is 940 plate appearances over 5 years, so it is a pretty big sample size, he also walks 4.6% of the time. So he doesn't walk a lot. He also very rarely strikes out, so he's got that going with him like Iglesias. He's supposedly, I haven't watched him enough, but sure-handed defensively at second base and third base. Hits for a relatively good average, at least throughout his major league career on average. I mean, last year with Chicago, he had 221, but his career average, including his years in Chicago, get it up to 275. So he actually profiles as a similar player to Iglesias, but there are two negatives that he does not have that Iglesias has. Number one, we'll get the jokes out of the way early. He doesn't have a great singing voice. I'm just kidding. He may have a great singing voice. He doesn't have the vibes that we know from Iglesias. The other thing is, he doesn't play shortstop. And like I mentioned, as we've talked about this, to me at least, that's a big deal. I would want a guy who's going to fill that role to be able to play shortstop just in case there's something happens to Lindor or you want to give him off days. So right now, where things stand, does this eliminate the Mets from Jose Iglesias? No, it shouldn't. He just adds to that same competition. So I don't think it eliminates them getting Iglesias. I think it keeps them in the same spot they've been in, which is they may not want him back. They may view Beatty and Mauricio and Young and now Madrigal as guys who can kind of fill that role even if they don't play shortstop. So the way the contract is structured, it's a split contract. He can easily be in AAA. We'll see. I mean, right now, if we're projecting our 26-man roster competitions, and we will do that at the beginning of spring training on a Rico Brogna, I don't know if I project him to be on the opening day roster. I got to really factor in the Acuna thing. Are the Mets willing to let Luis Angel Acuna be a super utility player on opening day as opposed to playing every single day? So I don't think the signing eliminates them from Iglesias, but as we have this discussion, something we haven't had a lot of during this offseason, we frame the backup infield spot. We talk about the options. I just think the Mets may not be that interested in him because of the asking price and because of the other options that they have.
You laid out that they have a pretty, jam-packed roster right now. There's not much flexibility. There really is not much room. But do you think that besides the potential Pete Alonso, maybe Iglesias, whatever, we'll find out, are there other moves that they're going to make? I mean, is there any more wiggle room? Like you're talking about Michael King, and which is probably not going to happen with Michael King being traded, but maybe Dylan Cease still. If that happens, you're talking about prospects probably going over, probably from the 40-man roster.
Well, that is the other point, and you're 1,000% right about it. Like, we mention a lot of names that if the Mets pull off a trade for Dylan Cease, and I don't think it's going to happen, but you never know, or even a trade for Luis Castillo, I wouldn't completely eliminate that. Or they dump Starling Marte. We've heard those rumors. Pat Ragazza reported that they were talking to Kansas City about that a few months ago. So if you eliminate guys from this equation, whether it's middle infield prospects like Mauricio or Acuna or Jet Williams because they're in a trade, does that make it more likely they bring back Iglesias? Absolutely. So there are things that can change that. We mentioned the outfield, how loaded up the outfield is. Well, trading Starling Marte is still a possibility. I'm not for it, by the way. I've made that very clear on some past Ricos. I like Marte as a right-handed DH. I think he's perfect, and I think he has a really good chance to excel in that role. But yes, that's the other factor that can really change the outlook on Jose Iglesias. And he's still out there. So the Mets are in this spot where until he's picked up by another team, by the way, I know you'd hate this, and I've said this as a joke on the air, but I kind of mean it. He's perfect for the Yankees. He really is. I mean, they do not have wherever they want to play Jazz. So let's say second. They don't have an everyday third baseman. If Jazz is playing third, they don't have an everyday second baseman. DJ LeMahieu, Oswald Peraza, Oswaldo Cabrera. I mean, you wouldn't want a sure-handed defensive player like Jose Iglesias who gives you quality at bat. I don't think that's a terrible addition for them. So there are teams that could use the player, but I don't know what's being offered. I don't know what he's asking for, which is the real question here.
Well, and again, like you're talking about a guy who just was about to retire from baseball up until he decided to stick through it and go to the minors. You laid down his stats and stuff like that too, man. Like we know who he is. He's not fooling anybody. Even last year's quote unquote resurgence. I mean, that's who he is. He's doesn't have any power. He's a contact hitter, and he got it on base a little bit more than normal.
I would, and Madrigal kind of is him. He hasn't proven it at the major league level, but when you look at their skill sets, it's very, very similar. The one big negative, I harp on it because I think it matters, is that he doesn't play shortstop. And I think that's part of the beauty of Jose Iglesias, that we saw him at second base and he looks unbelievable. We've seen him at third base. He looks fantastic. And we didn't see him a lot at shortstop, obviously, because Lindor played. And then even when Lindor got hurt, it was mostly a Luis Angel Acuna. But that's his A position. So you've got a guy who you could put anywhere on the infield, and he looks unbelievable.
You said it though too about Madrigal, and then this is the thing I saw about him. I was like, hey, he doesn't strike out a lot.
Yes.
He had 85 plate appearances last year. He better not strike out a lot. He get,
Well,
you know, I mean,
we're not
let's be
looking at the
serious.
totality. We're looking at the percentage. You know what I mean? that's all. So we'll keep an eye on the Jose Iglesias thing, but right now, educated guess based on the roster, based on the payroll, based on where everything is, I would say it's unlikely he's back, but I wouldn't rule it out. I think, like Hoff mentioned, there are things that could occur over the next few weeks that make it more likely. Specifically trades. We've talked about the Dylan Cease thing. I don't think the Mets are going to trade for Dylan Cease right now. I don't. And I think the Michael King thing is completely done because Michael King agreed on a contract. Him and the Padres avoided arbitration. And when you look at the structure of that deal, that is a Padres special for the year. And there's also a mutual option for next year. I think it's unlikely it's picked up by both sides because if King has the year he had this year, some bitch is going to be a free agent and he's going to just get paid. So I think that clearly that deal shows you the Padres are not trading Michael King. I think the guy they would trade is Dylan Cease. I also just wonder, like, they're trying to win. I know that there's a weird ownership situation there with Seidler died and the wife has control. And the brother's looking for control. I don't know what the hell is truthfully going on over there, but it would be so dumb to trade Dylan Cease. I think it's probably more of a trade deadline thing if the Padres have a bad year. And I mentioned this on the last Rico. I think it was the 420 Rico, or maybe it was a different one. I can't remember that one. It doesn't fit David Stearns to trade a lot of prospects for a rental. And Dylan Cease is a rental. He's going to be 30 years old upon free agency. And we know the way David Stearns feels about giving long-term contracts to 30-year-old starting pitchers. So a rental, I think he would do if the deal is right. I don't think the deal's going to be right. And also, if you deal for a rental, you better re-sign Alonso because then you're going for it. So you may as well put the best roster out there on the field.
Can you explain to me? Because you're right, but I don't think that Michael King is going to be moving at all now because of what just happened. But maybe I'm just reading it really, really wrong. But they settled arbitration, and the way they made it work was this year he's making $4 million, and next year he'll make 15, but it's really 7.75. Explain to me how this works.
I think that there's a lot of easily made incentives that are going to bring that contract up, and I don't know if that's to manipulate the CBT. I don't know. Honestly, I saw it, and the way I read it was they're not trading him.
Right. Yeah.
I read it as they worked out this kind of deal and it benefits them somehow that they're not trading him. But yeah, like there's a signing bonus that's tax-free because he lives in Florida or has less taxes in it because he lives in Florida. Obviously, he pitches in California. And then there are easily hit incentives that bring that number up. And then, yeah, you mentioned there's that mutual option for next year. So I just don't think Michael King's an option. I don't think they're going to trade him. I think Dylan Cease is the guy that they could potentially move, and I'd be interested in him as long as it's not crazy expensive for a rental. Like, it's a rental. Unless I have completely misread David Stearns, it is an absolute rental when you're talking about a guy who's going to be 30, enter free agency. And do you know who represents Dylan Cease? Do you just want to guess just for fun?
His mother.
It is not Dylan. It's not Mrs. Cease. No.
Oh.
The agent for Dylan Cease is Scott Boras. I know. He represents everybody. Jose Iglesias is represented by Scott Boras. Now, as far as Pete's concerned, because how do we do a Rico without talking about Pete Alonso? Is that even humanly possible? It feels as if the longer the Mets don't do something like Ryan Mountcastle or Yandy Diaz or some kind of right-handed platoon option at first base for Brett Beatty, assuming they keep Vientos at third. Because right now, when you imagine the world of Alonso's gone, just imagine it. Alonso's gone. They moved on. The way they fed that to us a week and a half ago. He's gone. What are the options? Well, Brett Beatty is clearly going to get an opportunity. There's no doubt. But what about against tough lefties? Brett Beatty's literally going to play against all lefties? No way. And you look at the other options on this roster, there really isn't anybody. Marte is the right-handed DH with Jesse Winker. But what about that first base, third base situation? There really isn't that right-handed bat. So you see a Spencer Torkelson or a Mountcastle. Diaz is better than that, so I don't really want to include him in this, Yandy Diaz. Yeah, they would add some kind of right-handed platoon option. It makes a lot of sense. It just does. And if Brett Beatty fails, maybe that guy ends up playing a lot more. The longer they don't scoop that player up, the longer we all sit there and say, oh, this can happen. The longer Pete Alonso doesn't sign with the Toronto Blue Jays, who have some level of interest, the longer you say he doesn't want to go there or his wife doesn't want to go there. The longer this drags out, it's the exact opposite of something Hoffman said the other day. Sorry, bro, I disagree with you. The longer this drags out, the more it actually feels inevitable that he'll come back for all of those reasons. Like the Mets haven't really moved on. When they spread that, they're moving on, they're reallocating the funds. Sure, they're reallocating funds. I get it. Then Cohen has to make a decision about a tax. It's already an expensive roster, as he said. Absolutely. But they haven't done anything position player-wise to really replace him. Hasn't happened. To me, Jesse Winker's unrelated. So as long as money, yes, is being spent, sure, but they're not bringing in that right-handed first base option, the more you think, no matter what's reported or what's said, oh, the Mets are keeping the spot open. And again, the longer he doesn't sign somewhere, the longer it remains possible. Now, this is unhealthy for all of us because I've made this comparison, but it feels like you're waiting for your ex to say, I reconsidered. I want to get back together. And I don't want to get my hopes up. I want Pete back. I've made that very clear. But I'm just reading the tea leaves. The longer this drags out, the more you think, okay, this is going to happen. And if it happens, I'll be very excited. I can't wait to do that, Rico. That'll be a very excited Rico. Pete's going to pop the champagne. Yeah, we're all going to be pumped up. Hoff, your confidence level as we sit here right now, recording this live in the wee hours of Sunday morning, February 2nd. Hopefully people have downloaded and consumed the Rico Brogna within a reasonable time frame. But whenever the hell you listen to this is fine. Where's your confidence level that this actually happens and Pete returns?
Well, considering it was supposed to happen on Friday, I feel terrible. I feel like it's like a 10% chance. Can I explain to you why? And I don't mean to be this pessimistic person. No, I didn't pop another gummy. So this is actually me and not paranoid, Pete. Here's the reality. Yeah, I think there's this truth. He wants to be a Met. I think it's it. Like he doesn't want to. The stories about him and the Reds and the stories about all those other things, Toronto. I just think it's all just BS. He wants to be a Met. He just wants to have the red carpet rolled out a little bit more than the Mets have been doing. Like he wants them to come a little bit on his terms. They've gone back. Feels like he's thrown away a lot of what he originally asked for to try to meet their demands, meet what the Mets are willing to give up. And they're still not looking to sign him, which means to me, it's not going to happen. It's just not. They truly have decided it's not worth it. Unless it's a 1-year really favorable contract, they're moving on.
Let me ask you a question. Let's say the best offer Pete Alonso has gotten, forget the Mets, outside of the New York Mets, is a 2-year, $40 million offer from the Toronto Blue Jays. $20 million a year, right? Less than the qualifying offer and less than what the Mets have offered. And the Mets kind of know this. Like Scott Boras has never come back to them and said, hey, the Blue Jays offered this. Can you at least match it? And the Mets have the highest offer out there. What should the Mets do? And by the way, that's very possible what I laid out, that the Mets offer is the biggest offer Pete Alonso has gotten. Should the Mets move off of their offer, which is the highest offer Pete's gotten, just to get Pete and Scott to say yes? Would you do that? Do you think that's smart?
I think it's more important for the Mets to have Pete Alonso on the team because right now the roster is not complete. Right. And it's not,
I agree with you. I want him on the team.
Right.
Again, if the Mets have made him the highest offer, which is entirely possible, you think they should offer more than what they've already offered when no other team has beaten that offer?
Yes. I think they need to act like they want him a little bit.
That's where I'll disagree with you, because I think you gotta. It's a business, man, and business sucks, bro. Business is rough sometimes. It's rough for all of us. Depends on the business you're in. It's not fair, man. It's not. But if the New York Mets have made him the highest offer, and they know that, and I'm speculating, right? I don't know what the Blue Jays have offered him or any other team. But if the Mets have made him the best offer, it would be foolish for them to offer anymore. It would be like, bro, this is the best offer you've received. We're just going to sit here and wait and let you come back to us, because why should we offer more when you can't even get more?
Two things that stick out in this scenario, and maybe this is just all me just coming up with some crazy scenarios, but I believe part of this, Scott Boras has a lot to do with the reason why no one is really offering him contracts, but also the fact is what we've been talking about. Oh, it makes so much sense for Pete Alonso to return to the Mets. I honestly don't think a single team out there realistically wants to get involved with a negotiation with Pete Alonso while they know the Mets are still interested in bringing him back.
Maybe. It's entirely possible. Entirely possible. Mark Cuban should be thrown out of the NBA. So I just want to...
Hold on, let's get back to the breaking news here. I
wanted to end the Rico Brogna by going back to, for those that have consumed this live, you understand it. For those that have downloaded this a day after the fact, we started recording like 10 minutes after Luka got traded shockingly to the LA Lakers. And it sounds like the Mavericks didn't talk to anybody. I'm bemoaning, hey, how come the Nets weren't able to offer all their first-round picks and Cam Johnson for him? They never got a chance, because the Mavericks, for whatever reason, in their own conference, the defending Western Conference champions, were in a goddamn rush to send Luka to the Lakers. Now I've come full circle. I was complaining about Kyrie blowing up another team. I was complaining about my team not being able to trade for him. And now I'm where Hoff and everyone else is, which is the Lakers? Like the freaking Lakers? Give me a break.
Do you think if Mark Cuban presented this trade or this situation to Shark Tank people, that they'd buy into this or to call him crazy?
Not only would they call him crazy, if David Stearns was oh my God.
Jeez.
If former Commissioner Stern was still around, he would have vetoed this thing like Chris Paul. He would have been like, we're not letting this happen. I mean, this is insane. So, whatever. That's all I could say. Rico Rewatch is coming up. Assuming there's no breaking news, you'll get your Rico Rewatch episode on Sunday. Sunday night into Monday morning, you'll be able to consume the Rico Rewatch episode 422, which is a rewatch of opening day 1985, the New York Mets against the St. Louis Cardinals. We are going to spring training. We will have details on how you can check us out and actually watch a live Rico, hopefully with no technical issues. No, I guarantee with no technical issues. We're going to be going down the weekend of March 8th and 9th. So if you're going down to spring training, there's a Saturday night game the Mets are playing in Jupiter, Florida. We're going to be at that. And then there's going to be a Sunday afternoon game that they play in Port St. Lucie the following day. A little Rico Brogna hits spring training. We look forward to it. You can email us anytime, thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, downloading, hanging out, and subscribing to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.